So they don't attend my webinars. So let's break down the cost of why this is so important. This screenshot here is kind of a year-long estimate with just one webinar a month. However, one thing that this particular chart isn't taking into consideration is the cost of hard goods like equipment, so computers, microphones, phones, and that can honestly add another $5,000 to $7,000. So we'll just cut it right in the middle and say $6,000. So right now with these costs, we're just over $11,000 for the year with the technology and the equipment costs for a webinar. The second part here is the promotional costs. So what we're actually putting in to get people to sign up to come to this thing. And this chart here doesn't take into consideration staffing costs. So even if it were just one person working on a webinar, which that would be a super tough job, just to have one person managing all these aspects, it's going to come close to about $200 per webinar was what the cost broke down to based on average salaries and prep times, etc. And people might not, if you're looking at this and you're like, I don't spend $500 on banner ads for my webinar. Obviously these costs are going to be split across the board. Some people might use all of these tactics. Some people might only use a few. So I'm going to cut it in half. You see that 5,500 number at the bottom there. So we'll cut that in half with the staffing cost of just one person. And we're looking at an average cost here of about $2,950. So we can round that up to an even $3,000. So if we're breaking down all the costs, we've got the technology, we've got the equipment cost, promotional cost, staffing expenses, and you've got a grand total of almost $4,000 for a webinar. And although this might not be your biggest marketing spend as far as an investment in one particular tactic, it's still an investment. So you're still potentially lumping out $4,000 per webinar. We're going to take this one step further and say, what's the cost of a webinar lead? So if your average registration rate is 260, like I pulled out from the poll, and your average attendance rate is about 38%, usually attendance rates right now are between 35 and 40%, according to some research that we did for the white paper that I'm pulling some of these stats from. We also found that most people surveyed for this particular white paper that we did said 20 to 40% of those registrants turned into qualified leads. So we'll cut that again right in the middle and say 30% turned into qualified leads. So we had 98 attendees, 29 of those turned into qualified leads. So to find the cost of a qualified lead, we're splitting the cost of the total webinar plus the number of qualified leads. And we are coming out to about $136 for a webinar attendee cost per lead. So like I said, this is kind of focusing on the attendee part, the people that actually attended your webinar. But if this lead is coming from a recording that he or she viewed after the event, which maybe spurred them to action, or maybe they happened to come across it, like I said, in their own research, then this lead is actually costing you even less money, which is half the cost of the lead, less than half the cost of the lead that comes from a webinar recording. So the point being, really, if you're only taking advantage of your live event, then your cost is going to be a lot higher. So it's really crucial that you're wringing it all out of this webinar, wringing your webinar out to the very last drop. So get the most leads for your buck, and then also think about getting the most content for your buck. And honestly, this is kind of an entire different webinar in itself, but I'm sure some of you have heard of the buffalo concept as a webinar being your buffalo, and there are tons of different ways that you can slice and dice this content so that you're really getting the absolute most value of it.